Here's what a feasibility study can and can't tell you about your fundraising campaign. Before launching any major fundraising project, campaign, capital campaign, comprehensive campaign, whatever they're called these days, it's fairly standard practice for nonprofits to conduct a feasibility study first to mostly see, is this campaign feasible? But there's so much else that you can learn that isn't just yes or no, the campaign is feasible. But it's not a magic bullet, it's not the be-all, end-all. It obviously increases the likelihood of campaign success by almost double. We have good data on that, but there are some limitations that we want to talk about today. So we're going to walk through both what a feasibility study can do and obviously what it also cannot do. All right, here's the can list. The first and obvious answer is how much money can we raise? We have a great video on how to set a fundraising goal, and then obviously the feasibility study process can be an integral part of setting that fundraising goal, dialing in exactly how much we think we can raise. But if we're not sure if we're going to launch a campaign at 5 million or 50 million, we would probably want to find that out, at least close. Can we get it closer to one of those numbers before we actually launch? Now, if you've seen our other video, you know that you also move as close to the goal as you can before announcing it publicly. Most nonprofits will get anywhere from 30 to even maybe 50% of their total campaign dollars pledged before they even announce the campaign, before they even go public. But before we start that process, we want a soft ballpark of how much can we raise. One of the main reasons this is so important is if you're trying to fund something specific, and that specific thing has a price tag of $8 million, you probably don't want to do a campaign if your ceiling is 1.5. It's like, well, we're going to raise 1.5 million towards this $8 million project. You get all this money together, and if you're 6.5 million short towards the 8 million, there's almost no point of having raised the first 1.5. So you have to be kind of in the ballpark of where can we spend this money where we're going to have high impact? Can we accomplish a specific goal? And is the number that we need close enough to the number that we think we can raise? And a feasibility study helps us determine exactly, or at least within a certain range, how much can we raise for a campaign. The next big question a feasibility study answers is who's going to give to this campaign? What donors do we have access to that have some level of wealth, that have some affinity for the project and excitement for what we're doing, and we can get in touch with fairly quickly? So we want to not just know, here's our list of potential people, but more specifically, have we talked to these people? Have we gone to our constituency face to face, one at a time, or had an outside firm come in and talk to our constituency one at a time, face to face, and say, yes, these people will support this project, or no, they won't, or how much will they support this project? If someone sees himself coming in at 10,000 versus $250,000, those are very different conversations. One of the key indicators of your campaign will succeed or fail is the number of qualified prospects you have at each level. And a feasibility study helps dial in how many prospects we have at each of these levels and who are those people. Some will self-identify and we can ask directly, but some we identify through actually talking to people and getting referrals to other people who also might be interested in our cause. So not just how much money we can raise, but who do we go to? What's our donor prospect list actually look like? Who are those people that we can talk to? The next is, what is the perception of your organization, not just in the community at large, but within your specific donor base and constituency? What do people think about your organization? Some of the questions we tend to ask are, what are some of the strengths you see of the organization? What are some of the weaknesses? You do the opportunities and threats exercise. You ask about specific programs, specific mission advancement objectives. Just sitting down and talking to someone for 30 to 45 minutes specifically about a charity, you'll learn pretty quickly what their overall attitude and perception is towards the organization as a whole and how excited they are potentially to maybe fund it and grow it into the future. If your perception is really bad, there might be some additional homework or some reasons to maybe not launch into campaign mode just yet. If the perception is very good, you might be right on the edge of, let's launch a project right now. If people are really excited about what you're doing and they highly support and want to put their money behind your initiatives, that might be a good indication that your goal should be raised. So all these questions kind of intermingle. If we have a lot of people in the who category, that pushes up the how much. If the how much is super high, that changes the perception of the organization. These are all interconnected. So it's not just, we have a checkbox, and a checkbox, but we want to learn as much as we can in each of these categories so that it can better inform our campaign plan, timeline, structure. Our entire playbook of how we build the campaign comes from the information that we get asking these questions of our interviewees, of our constituents in that feasibility study. Another great one is perception of leadership. If the CEO or executive director of your organization were to go out and ask people's opinion of him or her, say, hey, what do you think about me? What do you think about my leadership style? Maybe someone's gonna be honest and truthful and tell them exactly what they think, but probably not. No one's gonna say to their face, oh, I think you're doing a bad job with this, or I think you're doing a bad job with this. The advantage of having a third party come in is we can get an accurate assessment of what people actually think about the executive team, the direction of the organization, the board, the overall vision, any changes that are being made, any changes that the leadership wants to make, and we can assess this. If the perception of leadership is bad, obviously the likelihood that a donor is willing to fund a charity goes way, way down. The whole transfer of wealth is predicated on trust. So we know that if there's low trust between the people who are running the ship and deciding where the money gets spent and the people who are giving that money to be spent, there's just not going to be as much money flowing. We're just not going to have as much going through the pipeline. So the perception of leadership is so key, and it's very difficult to assess accurately without a third party coming in and asking on behalf of someone in a confidential interview where the responses won't have names tied directly to them. And finally, challenges and risks. So there are potentially additional things that will either make the campaign easier or make the campaign more difficult, and the study process, whether through surveys or the interviews in the study itself, or market research, or doing analysis of competitors, of other campaigns going on in the area. All of this data is so important because it helps predict the risks and challenges so that we can mitigate them before we start. Again, the better your plan for your multi-year effort is, the more comprehensive the data going into that, the more accurately we can predict the bumps in the road, the things that we need to handle first, any challenges we need to overcome. If there's some misconceptions about the things that the organization does, to clear those up as part of the process. It would be much harder to get halfway through the campaign and then realize that everyone believes one thing about your organization when it's not true, as opposed to using the process of fundraising and of sitting down with people and having face-to-face conversations to help clarify some of the things that are maybe incorrect or misconceptions about the organizations. That's just one example. There are others, of course, but that just gives you one more box to check of, say, can we learn these things? We can learn all these things. Now, all of this gets put into a timeline, playbook, the month-to-month to-do list. The whole roadmap of how to execute the campaign is all being data informed by these questions that we can answer by going through the process. Obviously, Private Philanthropy does these feasibility studies, but there are lots of firms that do this well. You don't have to hire us, but I would say don't hire nobody. I would say if you're thinking about embarking on a campaign, try to bring in some level of outside counsels to do this assessment properly, make sure that they know what they're doing, you get some referrals, and start your campaign from a place of being data informed so that your entire plan can be informed by facts and things that you know, and increase that likelihood that you'll succeed and reduce your risk by so much so that you can really look to the end and say, yep, we're fairly confident this is going to come to fruition because we have great data to support that. We have people who will support this project. The project tests well. We have enough donors. The leadership is bought in. The perception of the organization is good. We have enough donor history. All these things that have to be check boxes, we can assess these things all at once just by looking at it, taking a little time on the front end. And those couple of 3 months in the beginning to do this right yields years of correct fundraising on the back end. Hey, thanks for checking out our video. If you're getting value out of this but would like something more personalized, you can book 30 minutes with one of our experts to see if you qualify for our support services. Link below in the description. All right, here are the things that a feasibility study can't do. Some misconceptions that we might want to clear up. The exact dollar amount. Here's how we handle this. Because the feasibility study will get you very close to a number, we can't predict with 100% certainty this is exactly the number that you're able to raise, but we can get pretty close, and then we can use additional data to get us the rest of the way there. So here's what we do with that. Say, for example, the feasibility study comes back and say, yes, 7 million is indeed possible. We can definitely raise 7 million. Now, based on the data, we may be able to push that number and say, you know what, depending on the lead gifts, we might even be able to do 10 million. Or, based on the data, if we really are doing a terrible job and just none of our lead gift donors come in, we may only have 5 million. We can adopt this $7 million goal internally and proceed with the silent phase, or the quiet phase as it's usually called, of the campaign with 7 million in mind. And depending on how those first 8 to 15 months, 8 to 16 months go during that quiet phase when we're gathering lead gifts, getting our major gifts in the door and getting that 30 to 50% of the way, that gives us a better pathway to finalize this number. So you can launch a campaign without an exact number, but you gotta be somewhat close. You can't go in completely blind, and by having some number to adopt, then you move from there into the final number before you go public. So you can adjust that goal as much as you need to. It's all internal. It's not a secret. You can adopt the goal and say, hey, we have an initial goal. It's usually the language people use. We have an initial goal of $7 million. And then based on the performance of our quiet phase, based on what percentage of our lead gift donors come in at the amounts that they were predicted to, we can adjust the final number before we go public. And then we're likely to hit these depending on where we land. It might be the case that, you know what, 7 million was exactly right. We nailed it. But you can't start with no idea. We can't say, well, let's just pick 7 million and hope for the best. It's like, maybe it's 2 million that you have. You would definitely want to know if you're only able to get 2 million when the goal is 7, or maybe the goal is 15 and 7 is way too low. In both cases, we don't want to be wrong by that much. So the exact dollar amount to the dollar may not be correct, but you can get it pretty close and then use the first half of the campaign or the first third of the campaign to dial it in exactly. The next thing that a feasibility study cannot predict is donor decisions. Are the donors going to say yes when you ask them for money? Hopefully some of them will, probably a lot of them will, but you can't say for certainty, okay, we've gotten you a list of 10 people, these 8 people are gonna say yes and these 2 are gonna say no. They might softly indicate one or the other, so we build in a little bit of math to help us with this to make sure that this is not becoming a problem for us on the back end. So instead of saying we have exactly 10 donors at 250,000 and that equals exactly $2.5 million, we are totally confident. The study can't predict that exactly. We can say we have 30 prospects at 250K. And based on national data and historical data about how fundraising happens as a whole, we're gonna get an average of a 3-to-1 ratio. So for every 3 asks we make, we'll get about 1 gift. Now that shakes out typically to 1 yes, 1 no, and 1 like maybe or not right now or not that amount or some version of no that's not a hard no. So we can count on about a third. But if we have 30 prospects, then we say, well, that's gonna be almost certainly about 10 gifts, which, times that 250,000 is 2.5 million. And then that's how we start the goal. That's how we start the numbers for the goal. So it's not necessarily the case that we can decide which donor is gonna say what. We can say, hey, we have a certain number of prospects, or here's a list of prospects who are very likely to give at these levels. And with enough volume, you can more and more accurately predict how many of them will say yes with the soft amount of, we'll get at least a third of these. If we do everything right, it's very, very likely that we'll get a third. So we have some level of predictive data, but we can't get it exact. There's just no way a donor can decide. The donor may not even know. In the feasibility study interview, they may say, yeah, well, we think we might give something in the $100,000 to $250,000 range, somewhere in there. But then they have something happen in their life 6 months later before they get asked, and they're no longer able to complete that, or they have a different priority all of a sudden, or someone passes away. There's so many things we can't predict so that we can't get that exact decision. We can get it pretty close and get most of the way there using kind of law of averages. The last thing a feasibility study can't predict is internal readiness to the T, or internal excitement. Now there is some amount of internal readiness that we can predict. We can say, hey, the leadership seems bought in, or the board seems bought in, or we have enough fundraising volunteers, or the giving history is such where we can accurately probably count on this much money coming in. The project is tested pretty well externally, but we don't necessarily know internally. Where this can go wrong is if we say, yes, the donor base supports this, or yes, the leadership has given us a list of projects and the donors have indicated that this is their favorite one, and we get along down the road and suddenly the leadership goes, actually, that's no longer a priority for us. And they are no longer bought in at the level that they were in the beginning or that they may have indicated. If we run into that, the whole thing tends to fall apart because the leadership then goes, well, can you convince them to give to this? Or we're actually gonna put that project in the back burner. And then it's like, well, no, we can't. We've got 27 donors who've already given large gifts to this project that you said was a priority. And if the board is changing their mind mid-campaign or they pull out and they say, hey, we're no longer prioritizing this initiative that we initially thought we were going to, then it's very difficult for the campaign to succeed. So we can ask and we can say, hey, how sure are we that this whatever project we're undertaking is gonna be something that internally we support and that we have a lot of excitement for and a lot of buy-in for? But if not, if they're not willing to give the resources and lend of their time, this is the leadership specifically, and continue to follow the data and the metrics, that internal readiness piece can be incorrect. So we can get pretty close here, we can get some amount of this, but if the organization stops wanting to do the campaign, or some piece of the organization, some piece of the leadership decides that this is no longer what they want to do, very hard to control that and make changes once you've already gotten started. So hopefully, knowing this, you can move into a feasibility study with a little bit more confidence and then have a subsequent very successful campaign based on the data that you then collect. If you're about to be in campaign mode, or you're thinking about launching a capital project or some sort of a fundraising campaign, we might be able to help. This is one of the things that we do the best, which is feasibility studies and building for campaign readiness, making sure that the organization has the full playbook and able to do this right. I hope by walking you through some of these deliverables, you can see a little bit of the value that you might get out of it. And if you're not sure, if you're thinking, well, I might be in a position to do this, I might not, you can book a call with us and we can kind of talk you through some of the ins and outs of what it looks like. You can go to pridephilanthropy.com and click that Let's Chat button, and we can learn a little bit more about your organization to see if you may or may not be a good fit. If you have any additional questions about feasibility studies, you can leave them in the comments down below, and we would sure appreciate it if you could like the video. It kind of helps with the algorithm, helps push it out in front of more people who might be able to use this, and we will see you in the next video.